I have been in this field of research and writing on Sindhi history and culture since 97. So now it's now 28 years. When I started out on this journey, I actually hardly knew Sindhi in terms of a spoken language, and I could not read at all. Now, unlike say you or people like Rita Kothari, I did not have the good fortune to grow up in a Sindhi environment, or a Sindhi neighborhood. I came from a very different background in the sense that I came from an Amil family. Amils, as you know, are very westernized, extremely westernized. So there was mainly English spoken at home. My parents did talk to us, my sister and I, in Hindi when we were kids. But then we moved to a place where no Hindi was spoken, and therefore we switched to English, and it worked with the rest of the family who were also very largely English speaking. I think though that it was because I was Amil, because I came from such a westernized background, that at some level my desire to know about my roots, the sense of vacuum that I had in me was stronger than if I had been from a Sindhi neighborhood. There was so much of a vacuum that created that desire, that appetite to learn more. So when I started doing these interviews, and at that time I was doing interviews of partition survivors for Ashish Nandi's project Memoirs of Partition Violence. So initially I started out by interviewing people who could speak Sindhis, who could speak English. So that was relatively easy because I could talk to them in English and they would respond in English. But as my circle grew, my web of respondents, as that grew, then I began to go further afield. I then started meeting more and more Sindhis who did not speak English and who were more comfortable in Sindhi. Along the way, my ability to understand Sindhi grew and my ability to speak also picked up. To learn Sindhi or to learn any language by speaking it, you need a certain degree of shamelessness. You need to be okay with making mistakes. And I was fortunate, I think, that I have that element of shamelessness, that I don't care, I'm going to learn, I may make mistakes. So I remember that I was learning Sindhi, and from 97 till 2001, I had learned fair amount. I could express myself reasonably decently. In 2001, I went to Sindh for the first time, and it was really very funny because here I am thinking that my Sindhi has improved a lot, and the very first day I was staying with this Sindhi Hindu family, and they were asking me, about, I had never met them before. I went to Sindh not knowing anybody. I went to Pakistan not knowing anybody, a soul. So they were keen to know who I was and to know, why I had come there. So I was telling them about my research, and they were actually a bit taken aback. They even told me, they said, we are very surprised that you are doing this research on Sindhis and Sindhi history when you don't even speak the language properly. So that was like, oh, okay. But that first visit to Sindh, I spent one entire month there, and it was obviously, I was immersed in Sindhi language, pretty much most of the time. When I came back, people could notice that my Sindhi had improved. Again, I will give full credit to Ashish Nandi for prompting me to learn the script. He said it will really help you access the literature and that will benefit you in your work. He had been saying that to me a few times, and it was there at the back of my mind. It was just something I thought, I'll do it, And then I happened to be in Dubai in December of 2000, and that is where for the first time I met Dada Mohan Gyani. He prompted me. He said, you should go to Dada Vasudev Nirmal. Now Dada Vasudev Nirmal, for those who don't know, was a well-known poet and playwright who was living here in Bombay in Juhu. And Dada Mohan said, you must go to him, he will teach you Sindhi in 10 lessons flat. He has worked out his own system. So that 10 lessons flat really enticed me because it made it sound like, oh, very easy, So I went to meet Dada Vasudev Nirmal, and it was the evening, I remember. And I just wanted to meet, or rather he wanted to meet me before he said he would start teaching me. He said he wanted to gauge who I was, what I was, So I went and met him, and he obviously must have been satisfied with my credentials and so on, because then and there he started his first lesson. And he started with these basics of per and ter, per and ter, per, ter, ter, okay. And he showed me, he first drew a fish and he said this is a palla, and he converted that fish into the letter P in the Sindhi Arabic script. And he showed me how to write ter, he showed me how to write ter. And suddenly I could read or write words like patta, patta, putta. It was astonishing. It was like I had opened a door to a whole new world. For the first time, I could read Sindhi in one lesson flat. I could read at least those 2-3 words. And I remember for many years, my mother would write letters in Sindhi to her mother, or even her sisters-in-law, that is my pupis. And my sister and I would read the letters, we couldn't read anything. You know, there would be one random English word, you know, and we would just laugh about it. But now I felt, wow, I can read myself. So that was a wonderful memory, you know, that moment I can still relive it in my mind. Was true to his word, Dada Vasudev Nirmal, and he taught me the script in 10 lessons flat, but I had to do homework like a 6-year-old. Like a 6-year-old does it in school, writing pages and pages of either single letters or very simple words like patta, putta and so on, you know. So if one is prepared to do the work, to have that discipline and put in those hours, anything is possible. I have come across books in 2 different categories, Sindhi books. Now here I think it's worth recalling that Sindhi literature in India, first of all, I think we should be very grateful to specifically one human being, that is M.U. Malkani, Mangharam Udaram Malkani. Why? Because he was that older generation of Sindhi writers that migrated at the time of partition. Now he had other contemporaries. He had other contemporaries like Lalchand Amar Dinomal. He had, there was also Bhirumal Meherchand, there was also Jethmal Parsram, Asanand Mamtora. Now most of these others were really hit hard by partition, both economically and psychologically, more important psychologically. And they were not so, I would say, productive after partition in the years in India. Most of their writing had been already done in Sindh before partition. M.U. Malkani, although he continued writing, and of course he was very well known for his plays, especially his one-act plays. He is known as the father of one-act plays in Sindhi. Although he continued staging his plays, he also continued teaching as a professor in Jai Hind College, where he taught Sindhi and English. His most remarkable contribution to Sindhi literature in India was revival of the Sindhi Sahit Mandal. Now the Sindhi Sahit Mandal was a literary circle, which is really an informal literary circle, which was held in the residence of the Metharam Hostel warden at the DJ Sindh College in Karachi. Hostel warden happened to be M.U. Malkani, who was a writer, so he was holding it at his house, and he would get other writers to come and they would share their recent works, and it would be a forum for critique, you know, and it was a very healthy forum where people were respectful and they were willing to listen to all kinds of feedback and to accept that critique and, you know, use it to further their own work. If you read the memoirs of other younger Sindhi writers, like for example Kirat Babani or Sheikh Ayaz and all, they started out as DJ Sindh College students, and they would attend these Sindhi Sahit Mandal meetings. Now M.U. Malkani moved to Bombay, and the DJ Sindh College also moved to Bombay in a sense in a new avatar, which turned out to be Jai Hind College, because the professors migrated, a large number of students migrated. They set up Jai Hind College afresh in 4 months flat, which is an extremely inspiring story, using the premises of Elphinstone College. In a year or two, Jai Hind College acquired a hostel which was at Pedder Road. That hostel is no longer standing, but it is now, there is a building called Ajumal Mansions on Pedder Road, which is there in its place. And again the hostel warden was M.U. Malkani. So there was that continuity. What M.U. Malkani did was he started holding these Sindhi Sahit Mandal meetings at his home once again. The older generation of writers, as I mentioned, were on the wane. What also happened simultaneously is that there was this whole new generation say people who were in their late teens or early 20s, Sindhis, again were really impacted by partition, who really felt the loss of their homeland, loss of their culture, loss of spoken mother tongue or environment around them, and who also could see the suffering that their community had gone through during partition in Sindh also and here. With this younger generation, because they were young, because they had the energy, they were motivated, they were inspired to actually write about partition. So while partition silenced the older generation, it gave birth to this new generation of writers. And these young writers also then started coming to Sindhi Sahit Mandal, these weekly meetings. I think they were on Sundays if I mistake not. And that gave birth to a whole new generation of writers. And this Sindhi Sahit Mandal continued till I think 1962, which is when M.U. Malkani retired. Then he had to give up his house as the college warden, and he moved to Calcutta to be with one of his sons. Then for a short while, the Sindhi writers would hold the Sindhi Sahit Mandal meetings themselves, but they would hold it in one of these Irani restaurants which was in Dhobi Talao, near Metro Cinema. So that continued for a while, but then I think it petered out, and then anyway by then this new crop, the new generation of Sindhi writers had, I think, acquired enough momentum. They didn't need Sindhi Sahit Mandal anymore. Although it served a useful purpose as a forum for critique, healthy critique, they were able to then manage on their own. That is really how Sindhi literature in India developed. Now in those days, there were also, Sindhis being a business community, there were enough Sindhi businessmen who felt strongly enough to sponsor the publication of books and magazines. So for example, if you see old issues of Nai Dunya or any Sindhi magazine, for example, you will see advertisements in there, because that is how they managed. And similarly with Sindhi books, some of course were published by Sahitya Academy, some were published by other publishing houses like Nai Dunya and Narayan Bharti's publishing house in Ulhasnagar and so on. There were many like that. Somehow that generation of Sindhi writers were able to find the funds from their larger community and keep their publications afloat. Now unfortunately, with the passing of that generation, we don't have too many people in the younger generations who can read or write Sindhi and read Sindhi books. And now what has happened with Sindhi literature is that the younger writers, there are a good number of younger writers, but it is increasingly more difficult for them to find sponsorship or finance for their publications, even more difficult to find a readership. This has been said about Sindhi literature, that it has now become a situation where the Sindhi writers are just reading each other's books and that's about it. The larger community has stopped reading Sindhi literature, which is really a tragedy. So when I wanted to access Sindhi literature, that is books in Sindhi, I really had two different sets of sources. One set of sources was the older generation of Sindhis, and this I am talking not of my parents' generation but my grandparents' generation. Those who had been full adults at the time of partition, not young children or teenagers and so on. They had their own collection of Sindhi books, and after they passed, nobody knew what to do with them, with these books. Now unfortunately, in many cases, these books have been sold as scrap, as raddi or pasti or bangar, whatever you want to call it. It has really become garbage and has been thrown away, which is another tragedy. In a few cases, and this is after I learnt the script, people would say, they would ask me, I have these books, what shall I do with them? And I would say, please give them to me. Please give them to me. So I have acquired collections of various people who have passed away, and I won't say I would have acquired the full collection. I had limitations of space at home. So I would pick and choose and take what I needed from those selections. So here I feel very fortunate, very blessed that I was able to access the collection of someone like Kamla Hiranand, the freedom fighter, also K.R. Malkani, the RSS functionary who passed away as Lieutenant Governor of Pondicherry. I got books also of Mohan Punjabi, an erstwhile Congress worker, and then became a lobbyist, and many others. There are many others, and I am very grateful to these people, to their family actually. These people passed away, but I am very grateful to their family members who were able to give me these books. So that was one source. The other source was libraries. Now here, where are the libraries in India today which have these Sindhi books? In Bombay, of course, I first went to Bombay University Library. They have a good collection. Some books here and there, they will say it is not in good condition or it is effectively not available. Then I went to Jai Hind College. Jai Hind College also has an excellent collection of Sindhi books. Again, they have had this problem where certain books have become destroyed over time. And this happens everywhere in all the libraries. I haven't yet been to Vivekananda Education Society. So their college is in Chembur. I have not yet been there. But they are also supposed to have a good collection. Possibly National College in Bandra also. Then of course you have R.K. Talreja College in Ulhasnagar. Another huge source of Sindhi books has been the library at the Indian Institute of Sindhology in Adipur. There it's like the Mecca, in India at least, for Sindhi books. Another place where you would get Sindhi books, or rather two other places in Delhi. Delhi University, but the Delhi University Library also has a decent collection of Sindhi books. And another place would be Sindhi Academy in Delhi. They also have a library which I have used in the past. So some of these libraries you can visit, they will let you borrow or they will let you photocopy. Mostly you can't take the books home. So at some point I started taking photographs of the pages of the books. You know, the pages that were relevant to me, in some cases the entire book. Actually just a very amateur attempt with my cell phone, you know. It's not professional photography, it's not scanning, but at least this way it is digitized, and tomorrow if that book is eaten by termites, it is there somewhere in cyberspace. The third source I would say is personal collections. I thought I was actually focusing on two, but there is a third source, and these personal collections are large collections of Sindhi books, generally with writers. Like for example, the writer Nand Jhaveri, who lives very close by, he has a huge collection. He's been very kind. I have gone to his place and, you know, seen some of his books. Similarly, late writer A.J. Uttam, Asan Uttam Chandani, who was one of the triumvirate of Sindhi literature along with Kirat Babani and Gobind Mali, he had a huge collection. Okay, and I think probably his daughter Asha Chand would still have that. Like also the director of Sindhology, Dada Saheb Bijani, he has a huge collection himself. Dada Mohan Gihani had a huge collection, but then with age he felt he could not handle it, and he has shipped his entire collection off to the library at Sindhology. So this has been the third source for me. And what has also happened, one other source in Bombay was a library at Kamla Girls High School in Khar. And then at some point they said we are closing down the library. They were going to repurpose the school building for some other educational purposes. So they said if you want, you come and choose whatever books you want, you know, which was very, very generous of them. And of course again I had constraints of space. So I went and I could just go through and select some and bring them back home, you know. And I remember I didn't even go through all, I was just short of time, but I think they were also short of time. So I took what I could get, which is really very kind. I am very grateful to them for that. I am very grateful to anyone who has shared their Sindhi books with me, you know, whether I have borrowed them or whether they have been given to me, you know, permanently. Well, you know, the thing is, these books, especially those written by the first generation of Sindhi writers, they are really very precious because now they are out of print. Whatever few copies exist in whichever libraries or personal collections are the only copies left. If they are held in other personal collections and the families don't know what to do after the person has gone and they are sold as raddi, you know, that is another tragedy, because that's one more copy less, one less copy rather. So the remaining copies are really very precious. What I find interesting is that some books, whether in Sindhi, mostly in Sindhi, but a few in English also, by Sindhi writers in India after partition, these books have been published in Pakistan, in Sindh, you know, like Kirat Babani's autobiography, Kuj Likayam Kuj Budayam, that is printed in and published in Karachi. So somewhere that is also a big factor in keeping literature in India alive, Sindhi literature in India. When Sindhi writers in India, you know, this new generation that I was talking about, post-partition, when they started writing, of course there were readers in India, no doubt. The Sindhi community in India was actually focused on resettling, making their lives in India, and also adapting socio-culturally to the new environment. Somehow, despite the difficulties of borders and visas, these books found their way to Sindh in Pakistan, and they were received beautifully over there. Of course, in those days there was no internet, we only had snail mail. So the Sindhi writers in India developed friendships with Sindhi writers in Pakistan, And these were like, they became almost like pen pals. A few of them, but very few, had known each other from before. Like Arjan Shad had known Sheikh Ayaz because they were both students in DJ Sindh College. Okay, and I think probably both in the hostel. Or maybe not Arjan Shad, he had a family in Karachi. But they knew each other from DJ Sindh College. You know, Kirat Babani and Sheikh Ayaz were in the hostel together. So they knew each other, you know. Possibly also Narayan Sham. But the bulk of them had not met. They were mainly friends only on the basis of each other's books and each other's letters. And that was something very beautiful. And what also would happen from time to time was these writers would sometimes cross the border and go and meet their friends on the other side, you know. And for the Sindhis in India, when they went back, it was like a return to their roots. It was like a homecoming for them, not just meeting their Sindhi writer friends, but you know, all that. So there are some very beautiful narratives, you know, what they have written about. Similarly, when Sindhi writers from Sindh came to India, they also would write about their experiences in India, you know. So those also are very interesting stories. There was, I think, a very strong friendship between the writers of that generation, which we don't see today, or we see it in a different way. And what I find very interesting is many of these Sindhi writers who went, like I would, and they would go as couples, you know, many of these writers were couples, where you have Krishan Rahi and Maya Rahi, or you had A.J. Uttam and Sundri Uttam Chandani, Moti Prakash and Kala Prakash, yeah. So they would write, and when they wrote about their travelogues, you know, what I found very interesting is that they would give it a title, and the title would be either a line or even half a line, just a fragment of a line from a bayt written by Shah Latif. So it was a very layered thing. Now to you and me, we will hear or come across the title of that book, and it is in medieval Sindhi, right? You and I may not even understand it. What do these words mean? But these writers had grown up with Shah Latif, they read Shah Latif quite a lot. They not only would understand that fragment of a line, they would know which bayt it is from, what does it mean in terms of its literal meaning, what does it mean in terms of its metaphorical meaning, and all these, you know, there were like layers and layers of stories just in that one title, and so much conveyed to people who could understand the background. So I used to think that was beautiful. So my collection, like I would say, has, I mean, I don't think I have that much of a collection, maybe some 500-600 Sindhi books possibly. But like I said, it's very precious for me because these books are out of print. Most of them are out of print, and it's just impossible to find these books now. Most of them I have gotten through, like I said, when some person has, Sindhi person who owned these collections, when they have passed away, their family members have gifted them to me. If certain libraries have extra copies, like when I last visited Sindhology, they said we have extra copies of these books. Probably they get so many donations, you know, from other people or the families of those who pass away. So whenever they have extra copies, I have been very fortunate and blessed to have been given those. And even like I said, from like Kamla High School and so on. So that has really been my source. The other source has been on my 2 or 3 trips to Sindh, and I have bought books there. That has also been invaluable. And of course, once in a while when a writer will publish, and then they will send me a copy of their book. So Sindhi literature really has been like a wealth for me, you know, it's really a treasury, and I'm so glad and grateful to both Ashish Nandi for suggesting it and to Dada Vasudev Nirmal for teaching me, and also to Dada Mohan Gyani for suggesting Vasudev Nirmal. When I wrote The Making of Exile, I found that I got a wealth of information from first person accounts, from memoirs and you know, autobiographies. If you see the book, it is interspersed with my translations from these memoirs and autobiographies. So that was a great wealth of information and helped me to understand the whole experience of partition better. And in this regard, I must say that it's very strange, and this is a very personal thing. So other people may feel differently, and of course, you know, everyone is entitled to their own thing. But in my opinion, I have found that all this post-partition generation of Sindhi writers, I find their non-fiction, their autobiography and memoirs vastly more interesting and vastly superior to their fiction. I find that very interesting to read, and I feel I don't know, let's not be naive here. Even when a person is writing an autobiography, it is a recreation of their past. You cannot have a fly on the wall account, that doesn't exist. That level of objectivity is not possible for anybody. But having said that, it is still very, very interesting to see how their personal memoirs and their non-fiction is so different from their fiction. So I have thoroughly enjoyed reading all these autobiographies and memoirs. So that has been a great boon for me. The other thing also that helps me is biographies. Genuinely researched and detailed biographies, which are actually very few. Like one very fascinating biography is that of Dayaram Gidumal. Some people say it should be pronounced Dayaram. So whatever the right pronunciation is. And it was written by Professor S.N. Pherwani, who was a Shikarpuri, and he was, I think, the librarian at Bombay University. And he used to meet Dayaram Gidumal when the latter would go to the library to borrow books. And of course, Dayaram Gidumal had this very unfortunate episode towards the end of his life, which cast a big shadow on his name, or so he thought. And then he retreated from public life in a very big way. And I think that is what prompted Pherwani to write his biography. And Pherwani, and this was written, if I mistake not, in 1920s or 30s, way back. And Pherwani has done a great job, especially for someone of that era. You do come across certain biographies, I won't even call them biographies, it does not deserve that name. There are books dedicated to a certain personality, generally someone who has passed on, in few cases when the person is still alive. And those type of books are a bit disappointing because they consist of different chapters or accounts written by other people who knew him, very often other writers, sometimes his family members, but those are mostly eulogies. You don't get to really know too much about the person's lifespan or even about anecdotes or defining incidents from that person's life. So there are plenty of books like that, but those I find very disappointing. Genuine biographies like this one of Pherwani's, one of Dayaram Gidumal by Pherwani, those are really interesting. And it need not even be a full-length biography or full-length book. I think it was Muralidhar Jetli, if I mistake not, who wrote a very interesting and well-researched and a beautiful biography of Lalchand Amar Dinomal. Very, very interesting. I may be getting the author wrong, but these kind of write-ups, very, very interesting. Just coming across these memoirs and autobiographies has been a real treasure for me. The other treasure, of course, has been Sindhi Sufi poetry. Being able to access Shah Latif in the original. See, there are hundreds of English translations. You'll have translations by H.T. Sorley, you'll have translations by Elsa Kazi, you'll have translations by many other people. There's Amina Khamisani and all. And it's no mean task to be translating Shah Latif into English, from medieval Sindhi into English. That is not an easy job at all. But to my mind, the flaw is in the choice of language, not in the translators. English is not a good vehicle to translate Shah. And I used to read initially, before I could read Sindhi, I would read these English translations. I would be left feeling very unmoved. And some of them, like H.T. Sorley's was almost in this Victorian type of English. It just did not gel with me, and I used to wonder, why is everybody making such a big deal about Shah? Before I learned how to read Sindhi fluently, I came across a Hindi translation of Shah Latif. And that was really an eye-opener for me. Because to translate medieval Sindhi or even regular Sindhi into Hindi, into the same family of North Indian languages, one could relate to it better. For example, in Shah Latif, one very oft used word of his is Piriya, which is translated as beloved. And now Piriya is not a word we use in Sindhi these days. I could not relate to Piriya. What is Piriya? Then when I read it in Hindi, where he translates it as Priye, then you can understand, and relate to it better. So it's a very slim volume, Shah Latif Ka Kavya by I think Mani Shankar Dwivedi, and published by Sahitya Academy. And if I mistake not, it is out of print. But that volume was an eye opener for me. That really taught me how to appreciate Shah, because I could access him through Hindi, which was not as far removed as English from the original. And then of course later when I learned Sindhi and I learned to read Sindhi, then I could use or refer to Kalyan Advani's Shah Risalo. Now here's the interesting thing. When I first went to Sindh in 2001, and I was very keen to, at that time I didn't read Sindhi so well. I had just learned how to read, so I could read, but again that half an hour, to read one page. At that time I asked everybody I met that which book would you suggest if I want to read Shah in translation? Forget translation, which is a good book for me to access Shah Latif. In Pakistan, in Sindh, they are saying you refer to Kalyan Advani. Kalyan Advani's book, which had been published in India in the 60s, for which, mind you, he won the Sahitya Academy Award. Very well deserved, of course, no doubt. They were still referring that book to me. Similarly, at that time, I am saying I want a good dictionary, either Sindhi English or English Sindhi, and at that time they are referring me to Parmanand Mewaram, which is 20 years pre-partition. Of course, later Oxford has come out with an excellent English to Sindhi dictionary. That has, just beaten all records hollow. That is a beautiful dictionary. But at that time, these were the books that I was being told to read. So anyway, coming back to Shah Latif, it's only because I can read the script that I can read Kalyan Advani's annotated Shah, which makes it's like a world of a difference. It is still, I will say, not enough, because you still need to understand certain words, the context in which it is used and what Shah is trying to say. So people like, I would say, Dada Saheb Bijani, and he's been the foremost, I would say, he has really explained certain things about Shah's verses to me, and at one time I thought I could translate, now I have my doubts, but it has just been a sheer joy to access Shah Latif. Also Sachal Sarmast, who's way more accessible, because he's like almost 100 years later, or at least 50-80 years later, and his Sindhi is more accessible, although sometimes he goes off into Seraiki, and then again one needs an explanation for that. So the joys of reading these Sindhi Sufi poetry in the original, that is unmatched, because no matter how well you try and translate it, there is always something lost. For example, the beauty of Shah operates at multiple levels, in many layers. He uses a lot of alliteration, lots of alliteration, and that can never come through in translations. He uses alliteration, he uses, of course, there are other things in terms of the basic message, in terms of the way the poetry is, the way the verse is constructed, the very thought behind it, and the way he also brings in, if you look at Shah's poetry as a whole, the way he kind of encompasses life in Sindh in his era, where he's talking about the camel, or he's talking about the crow, or he's talking about the seafaring traders and how their wives are like bidding them goodbye, bidding them farewell with tears in their eyes, or he's talking about like a goldsmith, a camel herder. It just covers Sindhi society and the Sindhi landscape so beautifully. He brings that Sindh alive. So like one of my favorite verses which I would like to share is, he says, "Paye teer kaman ma Mia maar mamu muh mein aahi tu mata tunjo hi tokhe lage." I can never forget this. This verse was actually told to me when I was interviewing the daughter of Ram Panjwani. Her name was Ratna, I forget her married surname, and she told me this was one of Dada Ram Panjwani's favorite verses, favorite bets, and I immediately fell in love with it. Such a beautiful bet. So it means Paye teer kaman ma, by putting the arrow in the bow, Mia maar mamu, Mia is the Lord, don't hit me or don't take aim at me. Muh mein aahi tu means within me is you. Kahin tumko tumhara hi na lage, lest you hit yourself. And it's so beautiful at so many different levels. And there are so many other verses of Shah's which are just beautiful. Just to be able to access these in the original rather than by a translation in which something is already lost. And here I am not faulting any translator, I am just saying it is the nature of the beast that something will get lost. So that was the second treasure of Sindhi literature for me. Yeah, the other thing I found very interesting, and this is a very personal thing I will say, just through my research, and this is not restricted to only literature in Sindhi or only books I would say, but there are a couple of books in which have really contributed a lot, it has been very personally fulfilling or personal gratification, I would say, to find my family histories. Now, we all have 8 great grandparents, each of us. To find the histories of at least, I have been able to track down 5 of these 8. To find these histories going back to the 17th century or so on, and to know, okay, this person existed in my family or this person existed on this side, and sometimes they have done things I am not proud of. Some of my ancestors were dealers in opium, others were dealers or they collaborated with the British. I am not proud of these things, but you have other still who contributed so much to pre-partition Sindh, and that is definitely something I can take pride in. So, as I have said earlier, that these books, like especially the ones that were published by the first generation of writers after partition in India, Sindhi writers, that is really very, very precious because they are out of print. So, there is a very finite number of copies in existence, and if those get sold as scrap, those books may just vanish off the face of this earth. To my mind, there is only one real way of preserving them. See, you can have one large repository somewhere, like something like the Library of Sindhology, but anywhere you have physical books, especially old books, especially in a tropical climate, you run the risk of pest infestation or termites or whatever, and those books slowly degrading over time. I really feel bad about this, but there have been times when I have been in libraries and I have been looking at old books and I turn the page and the corner crumbles and I feel terrible. I really feel terrible. And this is only bound to happen with physical objects. These physical objects will have a limited life. The solution is to digitize. For my own purposes, I have done what I can in terms of taking photographs. Ideally, they should be scanned properly. If we could have some central repository online, which has all these books which are available, to the general public. But that requires a lot of doing, a lot of effort, a lot of expense. So, I don't know how and when that will happen. I just feel there is so much of value that we have inherited, from the previous generations. And it is a pity that we don't have readers in India. It is a pity that Sindhis don't know their own script and therefore are missing out. So, right in the beginning, when I first started doing this research, and before I even learned Sindhi, mind you, I had interviewed Popati Hiranandani. Actually, I can't say I interviewed her per se. See, Popati Hiranandani, pre-partition, was a school teacher in Hyderabad, Sindh. She taught in the same school where my Pupi used to teach. So, she and my Pupi were good friends and they remained friends till my Pupi died, like 50, 60, I don't know how many years later, right. So, they remained good, they were very good friends. Long story short, I would go and sit with her. She gave me my first copy of Shah Latif's Risalo, Shahjo Risalo. And I remember, I wanted her to teach me Shah. That is why I went to her. She would start with the verse, but Popati being Popati would then digress. And she would say, oh, this means this and this reminds me of that, and then she would talk about some incident or she would talk about some cultural concept. That was for me a very fascinating but very short period in my life when I would have these sessions with her. The big issue was that unfortunately Popati had very poor health. She had very, very poor health. It's like if I would fix up with her for a session, then she would say last minute that I am not feeling well, I can't make it. And we had hardly 3-4 sessions and then she passed away. But I still have a book in which, sort of a notebook in which I made some notes, and then she also wrote some things in Sindhi. Just a very precious memory for me.